for
Yeah.
this opening to the podcast, like the
Oh,
pre-roll
there you go.
credits. I thought maybe
Which,
I'm saying something interesting here.
as I was saying, I think it's going to be one of the most important topics to influence commerce in the next 10 years.
Welcome back to the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. Today we're talking about sustainability in wine, episode 25. We have our insiders back, our full slate of insiders. We have Jonathan from Bottlebooks.
Hello.
Laurie from Oushinery.
Hi, everyone.
Seb from Troly.
Good to be here, guys.
And Nick from Wine Owners.
Hello.
Okay, let's get started on
Nice.
sustainability and what it means for wine.
Well, then, and just before we start, David, I just thought we should, while the sustainability topic is hugely interesting, as of recording this 24 hours ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, and I really don't think it's a topic that we're going to go too deep into, but I wanted to acknowledge that overall, while there are different political forces at play here, I do believe that ultimately that kind of a move, democratically speaking, in a global society, I don't believe is acceptable. So my thoughts, I'm not going to say my thoughts and prayers, but my thoughts are definitely going towards the Ukraine people and the moves that the different political forces are making, trying to stop this. So yeah, let's move on.
Well, I mean, it could have an impact. You know, Russia's a substantial market for a lot of producers, and they're talking about closing off payments and financial. So I mean, we'll see how it develops, and obviously we'll get back to it if it really starts to affect the wine world. But I mean, it could affect.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But I think it would be great to see this sort of mobilization towards sustainability that people are putting towards this as well, because it's it shows that large countries can, even with a slightly difference of opinions or nuanced opinion, they can come together and stand together and really focus on tackling a single topic. And so it shows it's possible that where there's a will, there's you can move forward on step into a particular topic.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, so first question, what is sustainability in wine? What does it mean?
$1 million question, isn't it? It's so interesting because I was obviously doing a bit of research, preparing my notes before recording of this podcast. And so there's, of course, sustainability, but also biodynamic, there's organic, there's B Corp, and it's just, and I like to think I'm on top of everything, but sometimes I can see even in my own mind, so even I could imagine the minds of consumers, it can be quite confusing that way. So, I mean, I won't answer just right away, what is sustainability, but I think it's worth acknowledging right at the onset that I think sustainability is used almost as a big umbrella that is just has a lot of potential things underneath. Some of the things actually are not related. One of the realities, a lot of sustainable wineries also follow organic and biodynamic practices. It's just you can see the values are shared. But I think defining what is sustainable and what does that mean for the industry, and I think what does that mean to the consumer? I think there can be a bit of a disconnect here.
Just what does it mean for the consumer? What do you think the consumer? Are they clicking? They're searching for sustainable wines, or?
I think what Laurie mentioned is interesting because one of the challenges and potentially one of the potential pitfalls is really the fact that the definition of sustainability kind of varies between countries, and the understanding of what it means also varies. This being said, broadly, we're looking at having a, quote, sustainable supply chain, meaning there is as little waste, and there's a circular kind of a thought process here, where we're giving back to the planet as much as we're consuming off the planet. And from a consumer standpoint, I think we need to be very mindful that, look, our generations, right, anyone in the mid-30s going up, we more or less grew up with some idea of sustainable practices / green / recyclable. What we underestimate broadly, I believe, is that the newer generations have a significantly different set of values, and to them, it's not even an option to buy anything which is, wasteful. And so the decision at the front from consumers to buy into sustainable practices and sustainable products is not a decision which is just kind of happening right now. There's been a number of different studies and market analysis over the last 5 to 10 years, which have identified that as being a significant approach to how consumers decide on what to buy. Right, so it's nothing new. It's been there for quite a while, and consumers today, the newer generations of buyers, it's not even an option, right? I mean, if there is the option, they will pay more. If there is an option, they will buy sustainable. If there is an option, they're going to try and look up and find out and figure out how good is this product for the planet versus, oh, it's a bit cheaper, or it's on discount, or you know what I mean? So it's definitely something which is happening right now. I was looking at different certifications around the globe, and a lot of them have existed for 15 to 20 years, right? And so it's nothing new. It's really nothing new, except right now it's driving a significant amount of consumption, right? We're seeing not only COVID, before COVID, and COVID has only just accelerated the whole process. Consumers, we're now talking 70 to 85%, depending on what studies and what papers you're reading. 70 to 85% of consumers want sustainable products.
Right, because but I think it's also the one sustainable product, and I put myself in that bucket because I don't want the flip on that. Like, I do not want to buy a product that is terrible for the planet, right? Like, I think it's almost like, I don't know if people are like, sustainable is a word, like, right? Like, the definition of it. But I'm wondering if people, consumers, it's just like, oh, I just don't want to buy something that's overtly polluting or overtly bad. Like, it's just like it's interesting that way. Yeah. What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, we see this across the events area, especially as the return to the physical events. And like, we thought that in particular, getting rid of that, one of the things that would happen with COVID and moving a lot of events online was that would move people away from print catalogs. And what we saw is actually a far faster move away from print catalogs now that we are going back to physical events. That this is also what associations are demanding of their agencies. We have the first instances of the associations demanding that their agencies print nothing or print no catalogs at all, and use just a minimal amount of paper. So, it's been around for a while, but it seems that some things have come together, and the people who are in control of the purse strings, the ones who are able to, facilitate changes in parts of the industry that they're involved in, they seem to be choosing this moment to start pulling on those purse strings and catalyzing change, which is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, what about in the high end of the market? Is sustainability something that's there? Do you see less heavy bottles, or are they still big? Is a heavy bottle still the sign of a great wine, or is it? Are you seeing any indications from the top end of the market that they care about this?
So to answer your specific questions, I think the weight and size of a bottle is probably a sign of ambition more than anything else. Ambition and talent don't always go together, unfortunately. I totally am with Laurie on this whole question of what does it mean, because I think we have a situation right now, however admirable the goal is, and clearly it is, both in terms of the consumer concerns and motivations for buying things, and also the marketing and positioning efforts of businesses that adopt it. I think we've got a challenge. I think the challenge is you've got lots of standards, can I say it sort of broadly speaking. You've got lots of organizations who purport to be in a position to set and to check on the application of those standards, some of which seems to me to be quite difficult to check. And I think that you've got different concerns in different geographies. So, for example, the issue of use of water is a non-issue in Europe, because it is forbidden to irrigate with water, whereas clearly it is an issue in California, for example, and the question of whether that's incredibly wasteful and in fact, I suppose, ethical in a state which from time to time runs out of water for its residents. And I note that there are lots of sort of things that certain wineries do, but I don't ever see, for example, the sort of the formation of underground reservoirs that feed into ponds where the roots of plants cleanse the water as something that's probably going to end up in a sustainability standard. And in a funny sort of way, it sort of reminds me of the extent to which the classification system in Saint-Emilion has become more and more elaborated over time, to the extent that the people who were the benchmarks for that appellation have gone, you know what, we're actually not going to bother anymore. We're going to exit the classification altogether, because I think they had felt it had become so meaningless and discredited. They didn't really want to have the association with it anymore. So I think the answer, so there are two answers. So to answer your question, I think the motivations are the same. The generational demands of Gen Z and all the rest of it are totally in sync, whether you're drinking smart bottles or not so smart bottles. I suspect that there are far less concerns at one level, that is to say, let's say the level of, is your winery sustainable? Because in a small producer that's making 30,000 or perhaps 60,000 bottles in Burgundy, the size of their winery and their use of energy is probably quite insignificant compared to some of the sort of really big organizations, processing grapes through their very large setups. So I think the consumer motivations are the same. I think the desire to align is the same. So where there is money and an ambition to improve the quality of what a producer is doing, they will spend money on those things. I think examples are, for example, Château de Montrose in Bordeaux, Ponticani in Bordeaux are a couple of really good examples, but they've got proper money to do this stuff. So I mean, the motivations are the same. The question is, what does sustainability mean? And it means different things depending on where you are, depending on whether you're a big producer, depending on whether you're a small producer, and depending on climate. The approach, the ability to embrace biodynamism in the south of France is a lot easier than if you're in a soggier climate further north. So,
but I don't
how
think...
do you reconcile all of these disparate realities into something that a set of consumers can understand and translate into something that actually means something rather than just a word. And I don't know what the answer is to that.
But look, I think the challenge you're highlighting is strictly based on the fact that wine is one of the few truly global product, right? You will find South African, Australian wines in Russia, of all places. But this being said, there is not dozens of certifications when it comes to wine, right? Wine is never going to be Energy Star compliant. Wine is never going to be, something which is not farming related. So the only certifications that we're looking at here in terms of sustainability is really towards farming, towards organic, and there's a handful of those, not a whole bunch of them. And the challenge is really that large businesses making wine, I don't think the concept of sustainability is, do we irrigate or do we not irrigate, right? Ultimately, it's all about the standards is really all about how do you manage your producing operation? How do you source goods, right? And a lot of these standards are effectively far more towards making sure you've got fail-safe and checks in the process, far more than the actual recipe. Do you put a bit more of that grape or a bit more of this grape?
Of course, no, of course, but isn't the danger then that you end up with programs that have effectively been designed by the bigger producers, and that therefore they are effectively telling the producers what the criteria for selection are, when they're completely irrelevant in most cases to smaller producers?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's ultimately the process of making a product is fairly similar, although there's some steps which scale more or less. But we do have a challenge right now where it's been identified in a number of places where large companies, large producers are far more on top of that trend than small producers. Because small producers, look, they have to run their sales, their marketing, their technology, their production. They have to run everything, right? It's a lot of effort. But so ultimately, all of these kind of trends, large companies are more on top of it. Smaller producers, while they're not as aware, it's our responsibility as a group of suppliers to try and help the different actors, the different producers be on top of it. And ultimately, being organic certified, USDA certified in the US, being ISO farming management is 1400. So there is a certification process. It's not an expensive process. You just need to be trained. You just need to have your business assessed, and that's pretty straightforward. But ultimately, I also think from a sales and marketing perspective, as smaller producers, there is a number of different ways that we can start surfacing a more sustainable, more ethical business practice. You know what I mean? I have a winery in Texas. We have at Troly, we are working with multiple customers, but we have a winery in Texas who installed, they have their wine clubs, right? They have their tasting room, cellar door, where you can sample the wines. They've installed a $5 discount per bottle that consumers bring back, right? So instead of buying a new bottle, irrespective of the weight of the bottle, instead of buying a new bottle, they're effectively telling customers, you know what? If you for every bottle you're bringing back, you're getting $5 off your next purchase, right? So ultimately, they're saving. There's no recycling cost. The consumer is acting in a green kind of a fashion, bring the bottle back, and they're maintaining the relationship with these customers, and they're actually creating, from a marketing standpoint, they're creating a huge talking point in the community. So I think there's a number of really interesting ways that smaller producers can start differentiating themselves. Wine is dominated by small producers. right? Broadly speaking, and wine does travel cross borders. So when you're looking at CO2, when you're looking at the overall sustainability of supply chain for wine, it's never going to be that straightforward, right? It's impossible to have strictly local wine consumptions around the globe.
Well, even I was, looking at stats and everything, and obviously I know the famous glass bottle, like heavy or not heavy, if you just look at the carbon footprint of wine, like it still is at 28 or 29%. Like it's just this reminder of such a high number. One thing I wanted also to kind of point out, because I think I don't want to miss that more, like on the marketing of sustainable wine, is also like having this consciousness of, not just being virtue signaling, or like in that case, like greenwashing. I think it's just something I don't have like the full solution, but like, suppliers have to walk the talk as well. And that is why, often a sustainable winery will also be organic or biodynamic, because it ties in together. But like there's a real danger of greenwashing. So I just got the definition of greenwashing, so we're all on the same page. Greenwashing is deceptively claiming that its product and policies are more environmentally friendly than in fact are. And I think this is something really to keep in mind, because again, like especially younger generation, like they can smell the bullshit as well, like it's just, even when I see sometimes like Chilean wine really crazy cheap and all of these things as well, like there's been like warning signal. So just something to keep in mind as well. And I don't know if it's putting like more certified badges or something, but greenwashing, not just in the world of wine, it happens across the board in consumer goods. And it's, is organic cotton coming from, the one region, like that much better? It's organic, but do you want it? No, right? Like, so it's just kind of like, it's just like, it's an interesting, we are a global society.
I think one of the challenges that you're highlighting is with regards to the overall supply chain, right? So there are some mechanism by which we're capable of certifying or having some sort of a structure around production, right? We can certify a vineyard. We can certify how cotton is being grown in a certain country. The challenge is in the supply chain, how transparent is the consumer at the very end able to look back? And that's where, look, there's a concept of fair trade. We've heard, look, I grew up with fair trade coffee in the 80s and the 90s.
I remember the logo and everything, totally, yeah.
Correct. And to this day, look, the concept of fair trade is still kind of a blurring around. I don't feel it's as used as it should be, right, overall, because we know, as you mentioned, that some cotton, you just don't want to fucking touch it, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, look, there is a challenge with regards to greenwashing. Absolutely agree. I also think as a society, every move, every trends, every patterns we're going through is a bit of a balancing act, right? And right now we're trying to push. It might go to a point where the current certifications are just overused and don't really mean anything. We're going to bring that back to tighten it up a bit. But we know there's definitely a trend, and everyone in the world of wine today needs to look at how their business is running and whether they're capable of being ethically more responsible, and promote this in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah. So and just to put like a word to that, like more in the word of like business, like that's often what it's called nowadays, like the triple bottom line, right? Like to just like profit, people, and the planet. Like at the end of the day, those are businesses that are here to make money. And I don't think consumers, we're all good with that. Like that's just how the planet runs, like, how the society economy runs, but like shouldn't be like at the detriment of, the planet as a whole, and then like the people like working the land and making the product happen. So I think that's what triple bottom line. Sorry.
I mean, ultimately, a lot of this, I think a lot of this, I mean, there's the certifications and the and the softer ways of managing sustainability, it's what I think it ultimately both helps or also demonstrates the necessity of is that regulations, the regulatory environment also has to keep moving forward, because if you want to, like, the best way to start a recycling program is that the government requires that boxes contain 10% recycled cardboard or paper, and then all of a sudden there is a market for recycled cardboard. You can build a business around recycled cardboard, and of course you need to, there's going to be costs for people involved in doing these things, which is where you get the consumer pushback. But I think, like, you can't really move those regulations forward when the consumers haven't already shown some interest in it. So I think this, even if the certifications can sometimes get watered down over time, if you can tell the story of, well, the consumer understands now sustainability because we can show this growth in the sustainability market, it gives politicians then perhaps a bit more confidence in passing something that a few years ago might have not been accepted by their constituents. But it's ultimately everything's, or your pocketbook plays a very, like, an outsized influence on whatever you do, whether you're a business or a consumer. Obviously people can have some preferences, but it's in a completely free market, there's always going to be a very wide variance out there.
Nick, is this sustainability, is it something that winemakers, wine owners, wineries understand deeply? I mean, we've talked before how wine is one of the most affected industries by climate change, and you're talking about an industry with the owner, the manager, everybody is in the field. They're in the fields. They feel nature around them. Does that make it? Do you think that plays a role in this?
It probably does, as does scale, as we were discussing earlier. But I think then sustainability starts to mean slightly different things to them. It kind of means, how they look after the vines, because after all, they spend most of their time, to your point, in them. It's how they wild the vineyards. It's how they think in terms of minimal intervention, minimal use of fertilizers, which are becoming less and less applied in places like Burgundy, and it's about how they're tending their vines as well. Increasingly we see people who are not doing rognage, not cutting the top of the vines off, but are letting them shoot and braiding the vines and doing all that kind of stuff. And I think that they would consider that to be sustainability. They would consider the minimal addition of sulfur just before bottling as being sustainability, significantly reducing the amount that's put in the bottle, with probably very similar effects in terms of stability and considerably less headaches experienced amongst consumers. They'd see choosing the Diam with green kind of plant-based glue in it as being an important choice over the old Diam. So I think those are the sorts of things that they're really focused on. And of course they want to insulate their winery and make sure that they're as efficient as possible, but they're probably not the ones who are, building, sort of green energy banks of, windmills and God knows what else that the bigger producers probably would be thinking in terms on, because they're thinking in terms of, construction and scale to solve bigger problems.
And so when we're talking about sustainability, we jumped upon this too, and I think maybe it's a bit of the opposite of what you're talking about, Laurie. So maybe I'll go to you on this one. But what if you genuinely are trying to be sustainable? First of all, like where do you start? And maybe to Nick's point, it depends what region you're in. But how do you communicate that? I mean, is it certification we talked about? Is it the story that you have? Is it the label? Is it the packaging? If you have a paper bottle or something crazy, or I mean, how do you communicate to? Because, as we were talking before, maybe even the word sustainable is a bit fuzzy in everybody's mind.
I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I have the solution. One thing we have seen at Oushinery is more and more like info about like badges and certification like appearing on the back label. It's almost like between like the mandatory or like the number of like it's really like there's not much space left for actual copy describing the wine, like with the barcode and everything. It's just logo.
We need to find the space.
Yeah, but like as designers, it's just like, oh goodness.
Yeah, exactly. You figure it out.
So that's kind of interesting. What's also interesting is we're seeing it like a client, and that's more required from the channel of distribution. Before, like when we started Oushinery 4 years ago, like we were only doing front bottle shop because that was the ID card of the product. That's what the consumer wanted to, recognize and see. What's interesting is I would say now almost close to 50% and growing every month of our customers are doing front and back bottle shots as part of the ID card, because people, first channels like retailers or like Instacart and everything, like they require both. So it's driving that demand, like you might as well. But it's also because that back label is holding so much precious information. Before it was just a barcode, who cares? Nobody's going to read it. But now you have, is it live certified? Is it sustainable? Is it B Corp? Like we see more and more of that. And then even more recently, I would say in the last 3 months, especially starting January, we have redone a lot of original front bottle shot. Technically, the design hasn't changed, but there is like I won't give name, but so it's all the same. But then suddenly, sustainable farming practice, I think they had it a bit shorter. But it only used to be at the back, and now it's below the appellation. Like you have the wine name, the vintage, appellation, sustainable. Like that's been moved to the front. In the font, so it looks like it belongs to the label. Like it's not like a logo or an icon that you don't control. And I suspect this will happen more and more. So I'm not saying I have the solution, but that's what I've seen. Like some of, floated to the front in a way that is part of the design, like integral, and more badges and copy related to sustainability and kind of like wearing it more proudly and communicating it more broadly across all channels.
Do you think you'll ever see someone flip the labels and put the front on the back and the back on the front?
Well, actually, if you're in the US, it's a designer trick. You pretend this is your front, but it's a back because you have to put some mandatory. So, I mean, everybody knows, but like, but yeah, like it's kind of like interesting just to see like, so right now it's like we see 20% of what used to be at the back being, moved to the front, but I'm just wondering how far will it go? I think we have one winery, I'm pretty sure they moved their B Corporation logo, like the icon of B Corp, to the front label. It used to be at the back. So like it's just kind of interesting. And I'm thinking those wineries are also testing to see how it's received, right? I don't know, but like it's just fascinating. But it just shows how like it matters, and it matters in the eye of consumer. And I think also, and this is more in the world of, not the world of wine, but I see it more in the world of like other product, like maybe fashion or accessories, kind of also translating what it means. Because I think sometimes it's just like a bit abstract. So for example, like we've all seen, like I have this like laptop backpack, and like, oh, like this is made out of memory here, like 22 recycled bottle. Like this is what it means. So I would be curious to see if there's going to be a bit of a trend for wineries, because we are to just kind of like put it in metaphor or whatever you want to call it, so that it actually speaks to the consumer. Because I think at the end of the day, and I think that's the beauty of wine, but every consumer has a romanticized version of what it is to run a winery and what that means. And yeah, so just kind of like translating it and meaning like, oh, like we're doing it that way so that it's less polluting than the average, standard, like just kind of like helping putting an understanding. And I'll just finish with that thought that I was having when we were discussing. Part of me is wondering, like the boom of natural wine that we saw like a couple of years ago, I think it should slow down a little bit. I'm wondering if this boom like was also not because they were a bit better as a category of wine at claiming what they were not compared to what they were, right? Like where we're not adding these kind of things. We are not, so I'm just wondering, like, was it a way for consumer to actually get then what they were not? And like, yeah, then I want to put my dollar behind that more than taste, more than, I don't know, like it's interesting. Like I think you can define something by what it is. And I think it's tricky, as we just saw, to define what is sustainable. But it might be easier sometimes what it is not. And I think, I don't know, I don't have the answer, but I find it fascinating and important.
Look, it's interesting because I was reading about a restaurant in Montreal, right? So it's completely fucking left field here. But the whole point is that in terms of garbage collection in Montreal, if you have a certain amount of garbage, you basically need to organize your own collection, right, as a restaurant. And the restaurant owner was basically saying, okay, we started telling our patrons, we started telling consumers, we are not, whatever you leave on your plate, we are not throwing it in the bin. We are paying for that to be composted properly. So please be mindful, don't order too much. And if you want to share a plate, go ahead and share a plate. And that business actually cut their cost over 3 years in half with regards to how much waste was being generated by the restaurant. And I agree with Laurie, right? Ultimately, there's a bunch of different badges and certification, and there's different ways of looking at it. The challenge is to communicate it, right? If you're a producer, if you're anyone in the chain, if you're interested in being a B Corp certified, make sure you're communicating it. If you're interested, if you are certified in some way, or if you have special practices you're doing that your neighbor doesn't do communicate it. Have a page on your website explaining how you see ethical consumption and production. And David, you've mentioned a couple of times the glass bottles. It's interesting because I personally don't think the wine industry is really capable of adapting to new packaging, right? The glass bottle has been there for so long. I mean, it's just so romantic, the pop of the cork. But I also think packaging and sustainability and how we package stuff goes beyond the bottle, right? Those little paper bag for a single bottle that you walk into a winery and they put your bottle into a single paper bag that you may reuse but may not. Look, paper bags, recyclable, yeah, but they're not sustainable overall if they're used only once. Right? So packaging and sustainability in the packaging goes beyond just what the wine is in, but everything else that goes around the bottle, right? And so there's a lot of different things that we can do. I think communication needs to be at the heart of it. Everyone needs to sit down and have a think as to how do they think their brand is sustainable? How can we improve our practices to be less consuming and more circular in terms of an economy, right? Like as a consumer, bring your bottle back. Brilliant fucking marketing idea. Yeah. And ultimately communicate that. Make sure your staff is aware of it. Make sure everyone in the chain, every distributor, everyone who's actually dealing with your product is aware of what you stand for. And that is at the absolute starting point. And then we can worry about, is that certification better than this certification?
Any final thoughts Jonathan, Nick? No. Perfect.
Look,
Okay.
it's overall. I think it's a topic. It's a topic that we should probably try and stay on top of every couple of weeks, every couple of months. The numbers I was reading with regards to consumption, I'm almost worried that the current generations are missing out on the needs of the next generations, right? And we're seeing the next generation right now, right? The Gen Z, the millennials, the next generations. They are now the biggest consumer, and us guys, look, I'm a 20-year-old puppy, right? But ultimately, we're all now the older generation, and we need to stay on top of what the newer generation demands and feels and looks at and how they consume, because they are the biggest buyer today. Irrespective as to, you know, how expensive, how luxurious, how they are the biggest buyer of wine today.
Well, that was episode 25 of the Wine Tech Insiders podcast about sustainability. Thank you again, Jonathan from Bottlebooks, Laurie from Oushinery, Seb from Troly, and Nick from Wine Owners. We'll see you all again in a few weeks.
Catch you later, guys.
Thanks.